Hey everybody, this week's video is going to be in two parts. This is part one, watch part two afterwards. First, nearly all of you have met with me about your abstracts at this point. Fantastic. The rest of you, please come in this week. Great stuff. I'm really looking forward to working with you on your research and to reading your papers because you're doing some really, really interesting things. Okay, on to cybersecurity ethics. Please follow along with the slides. There's a lot of material here, in part because the chapter in Manjikian is terrific. I've added in some other materials, and you'll see more of that in part two. But basically, this is going to follow along Manjikian. So, originally, the definition of a hacker was anyone who liked to play around with stuff, and particularly liked to play around with computers. And in modern usage, it's come to mean somebody who accesses a system without authorization. Okay. Tavani, who's the textbook that we don't use anymore because it's gotten old at this point, talks about four different flavors of cyber crime, right? Cyber trespass, cyber vandalism, computer fraud, and cyber terrorism. Now, the question I have to ask, and it's the question I ask of Tavani all the way through, which is one of the reasons why I don't use him anymore, is the law of the horse question that we asked back from the very beginning of the course. Why cyber? Why not just crime? I mean, isn't trespass and vandalism and fraud and terrorism already a crime? So why do we need to cyber flavor it? What's the difference? And it turns out that there actually are some reasonable answers to that there is a difference between some sorts of cybercrime and some sorts of real crime. And some of this goes to what we've looked at in privacy in the past week, and particularly in the unit on copying, is that digital stuff is different from physical stuff. You can damage things and steal them in different ways than you can physical objects. So it does make some sense to treat some kinds of computer crime differently from their real life equivalents. But it still bears asking, and it's something that I would like you to think about whenever you see in the media something about cyber or whatever, is ask yourself the law of the horse question. Is there really anything different and special about this using a computer? Or is it just like anything else? And the cyber thing is done for scare tactics to make it sound like all sort of futuristic and especially dangerous and whatever, when it's really just, burglary and theft. So please keep that one in mind. Okay. More material from Manjikian is really good. The two things to be looking at now are the EC Council Code of Ethics, which I didn't cover in the Code of Ethics stuff because it's very specific to cybersecurity. And it's the people that do the Certified Ethical Hacker Certificate, which some of you may have known, may have taken, may have. And its ethics is not real sophisticated, I think. It's basically don't steal from your client. Except there are some limitations on unauthorized activity. And we're going to get to that stuff in a minute when we look at pen testing. But basically, it's very much, don't lie, cheat, or steal from your client. Kind of simplistic. And much more so than the professional codes of ethics we looked at before. Okay, part two, hats. Hats are an important concept for cyber ethics. There's white hat, black hat, and gray hat. And a white hat follows the rules in breaking into systems and is testing them for their employer or for somebody they've contracted to. And they do everything by the rules. They give everybody notice. They tell everybody what they're going to do, and they just test the system. On the other hand, black hats are closer to criminals. They break into systems without authorization. They take things without authorization. They exploit security flaws, sometimes for cash, like they'll blackmail companies into going, hey, pay me and I'll tell you what your flaw is. Otherwise, I'm going to release this to everybody. So a lot of what black hats do is basically shake companies down for money. Gray hats are in the middle. So they tend to be people with their own codes of ethics that don't necessarily follow the laws. If you're a D&D player, they're chaotic neutrals. So they're people who are doing things based on their own set of right, whether the law is on their side or not. So the key distinction between what kind of hat you're wearing is not what you're doing. It's whether you got permission to do it. Because pen testing or penetration testing is all about breaking into systems. Breaking into systems is bad, but if you're doing it with a company's authorization in order to test their security, maybe it's not bad. If you're doing it to, blackmail somebody, that's bad. So whether you're a black hat, a white hat, or a gray hat doesn't go to what you're doing. It goes to whether you have permission to do it and from whom. Okay. CertCC policy is basically a voluntary guideline for gray hats, for people who test systems on their own, who don't necessarily have a contract from the company to do it, but are just sort of concerned with cybersecurity and like the challenge of breaking into systems, but aren't out to steal stuff. So the CertCC policies are basically all about disclosure. You tell the company what you're doing as soon as possible. You tell them what the flaw is. You tell the public if the company doesn't do anything about it and it affects the public. And it's sort of a medium policy. The RFP policy, the full disclosure policy, is a very radical gray hat policy of tell everybody everything. Information wants to be free. If you found a vulnerability, don't go to the company first. Spread it everywhere. You may have opinions as to which one of those you think is a better professional guideline for those of you who are in the industry. Or if you're a cybersecurity specialist and you've got gray hats coming at you, what sorts of principles would you like them to follow? Okay, that's part one. Come back for part two. Thanks a lot.